The storm had come suddenly, swallowing the horizon in sheets of black rain and shuddering wind. Ethan had been walking for hours, his boots soaked through, his coat clinging heavy against his back when the last pale light of evening gave way to a bruised, moonless sky. The road had become little more than a river of mud, every step sucking at his feet, pulling him deeper into exhaustion. It was then that he saw the light. A lantern glowed faintly through the trees, swaying from the crooked post of what looked to be an inn, though inn was too generous a word. The building hunched against the storm like some wounded animal, shingles missing from its roof, one shutter torn from the upstairs window, its frame dangling by a single hinge. The sign above the door had once borne a name, but time and weather had eaten it down to nothing. Only a scrap of paint remained, curling like parchment. Ethan didn't care what it was called. He needed warmth. He needed dryness. More than anything, he needed to escape the relentless pounding of the rain. He staggered up the warped steps and pushed through the door. The hinges complained, the wood groaning as though the place resented his intrusion. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old smoke and damp wood. A fire crackled faintly in the hearth, but it seemed more ash than flame, more memory than comfort. Behind a counter stood the innkeeper. He was a man of indeterminate age, his face carved deep with lines that might have been worry or grief, or both. His eyes flicked to Ethan with a sharpness that startled him, dark, assessing, and too still. "You're soaked," the old man said flatly. His voice was rough, like gravel scraped over stone. Ethan forced a tired smile. "Caught in the storm. Saw your light. Thought I might. You'll stay the night," the innkeeper cut in, as though it were less an offer and more a command. He didn't wait for Ethan's agreement. He simply nodded once, then turned his head toward the corner of the room. It was then Ethan noticed her. The girl. She sat in a straight-backed wooden chair near the fire, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture unnervingly still. She wore a plain dress, washed to near colorlessness, and over her head was tied a sack of rough burlap, cinched tightly at the throat with a cord. For a moment, Ethan thought he must be imagining it. The sack was crude, the sort of thing used for potatoes or grain. It seemed obscene, a cruel joke, to see it covering a young woman's head as though she were not a person at all, but some unwanted thing to be hidden. Her breathing was slow, even. The faint rise and fall of her chest suggested she was alive, more than alive, aware of him. Though no eyes could be seen, Ethan felt her gaze on him, sharp and unrelenting from beneath the coarse fabric. The innkeeper's voice broke his thoughts. "That's Clara," he said simply, as though no further explanation were needed. Ethan swallowed. He wanted to ask, "Why is there a sack on her head?" But something about the old man's tone stopped him. It was the tone of a boundary, a warning. Not to trespass on words unspoken. Instead, Ethan cleared his throat. "I can pay. For the room, for food." The innkeeper studied him for a long, uncomfortable moment before nodding again. "Coin first." Ethan fished a few silver pieces from his pouch, clinking them onto the counter. The sound echoed too loudly. In the dim room, and he thought he saw, the sack-headed girl flinch ever so slightly at the metallic ring. The innkeeper scooped up the coins without looking at them. He slid a key across the counter, its iron loop rusted, the tag worn smooth by decades of use. Upstairs. Second door on the left, firewood's already stacked. Ethan took the key, but his eyes couldn't help drifting back to the girl in the chair. She hadn't moved, not once. Her hands remained folded, her head tilted ever so slightly toward him, the sack's rough weave catching the glow of the dying fire. He felt a chill then, deep in his bones, though the room was warm compared to the storm outside. Something about her silence gnawed at him. People coughed, shifted, twitched, scratched. They moved without realizing it. But she was like a statue. Only the steady rise and fall of her breathing betrayed her as human. The old man followed. His gaze and his face hardened. Best you get upstairs, rest. Storm won't break until morning. There was a finality to the words, a closing of doors. Ethan nodded slowly, murmured thanks, and turned toward the creaking staircase. As he ascended, the boards groaning beneath his weight. He cast one last glance over his shoulder. Clara hadn't moved, but though her face was hidden, though no eyes could possibly pierce that sackcloth veil, Ethan swore he felt them cold, unwavering, fixed on him as though measuring something deep inside. And in that moment, with rain hammering the roof above and shadows gathering in the corners of the old inn, Ethan realized that stepping through the door might not have been salvation from the storm at all. It might have been the beginning of something far worse. Ethan's room was small, but after the long, wet march, it might as well have been a palace. The walls leaned slightly inward, warped by years of damp weather, and the mattress sagged in the middle, but the firewood stacked neatly in the hearth promised warmth. He set down his pack, shrugged off his soaked coat, and fed 2 logs into the fireplace. Soon, a reluctant flame flickered to life, spitting sparks, fighting against the chill that seemed to have sunk into the very bones of the place. He sat at the edge of the bed, letting the heat seep into his skin, but he couldn't shake the image of the girl Clara sitting by the downstairs fire, her head bound in burlap like some strange, grotesque effigy. Her stillness had unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite explain. The storm battered the roof, the wind howling like voices just beyond the walls. He told himself to sleep, to let the rain and exhaustion drag him under. But rest would not come. The floorboards creaked outside his door. At first, he thought it might be the innkeeper checking the rooms, but the steps were too light. They paused outside, lingering in the silence, and then came a soft knock, 3 quiet raps against the wood. Ethan frowned. Yes? The door eased open without waiting for his answer. Clara stood in the threshold, her figure half illuminated by the firelight inside his room. The sack was still over her head, the coarse fabric darkened by shadows, the cord at her throat pulled tight. She didn't step inside. She only hovered there, as though caught between flight and entry. Ethan rose, unsure of what courtesy meant. In a situation so strange, Clara? She raised one hand, trembling, and pressed a finger against the sack where her lips should have been. Shh. Her voice was muffled, low and urgent, but the tone pierced through him all the same. Ethan waited, tense, the crackle of the fire filling the silence. Finally, she spoke again, each word drawn out as though it pained her. Please, don't take the sack off. The words landed like stones in his chest. He had not touched the sack, had not even thought of doing so aloud, yet she warned him as though she had plucked the thought from his very mind. Why? Ethan asked carefully. She shook her head sharply. Promise me. Ethan hesitated. He thought of the innkeeper's hard eyes, of the unease that had pressed on him since entering the building, and of the way Clara sat so still, breathing so evenly, as if holding something inside, her hands clenched at her sides. If you ever see me without it, don't look. Don't ever look. The fire popped. The storm hammered against the shutters. Clara, Ethan said softly, trying to coax sense from the impossible. I don't understand. Why do you? She cut him off with a violent shake of her head, the sack's rough edges swaying with the motion. No questions. Just promise. Promise me now. Her voice cracked on the last word, rising to a plea. Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle over him. A warning, as absurd as it seemed, demanded gravity. The desperation in her tone, the sharp tremor in her body, it was not the play-acting of a sheltered girl, nor the cruelty of a father's command. It was fear, a fear so deep it hollowed her voice into something that was almost not human. He nodded slowly. I promise." The silence that followed was thick, unbroken save for the sigh of the fire. Clara stood frozen for a long moment, as though waiting for him to retract his words. Then, at last, she stepped back into the hallway. Before she closed the door, she whispered one more thing. "If you hear me at night, don't come." The door clicked shut. Ethan stood alone, the promise heavy in his mouth. He felt the air of the room shift, colder now, the fire struggling against it. The inn no longer seemed merely old and worn, but watchful, as though its walls held secrets that pressed close around him. He tried to dismiss it all as exhaustion, as the strange manner of isolated people living in forgotten places. But as he lay back against the sagging mattress, staring into the ceiling's cracked plaster, Clara's words repeated in his head. "Please, don't take the sack off." And though he had promised, some small, dangerous part of him already knew the truth. He would not be able to keep it. Sleep did not come easily. Ethan drifted in and out, his body heavy with fatigue but his mind sharp and restless. The storm outside refused to fade, its claws raking across the inn with every gust. Rain hammered the shingles in relentless sheets. Wind rattled the warped window panes, and the old beams groaned under the weight of the weather. Yet through the cacophony, Ethan swore he heard something else. At first, it was faint, a dragging sound, like something being pulled across the floorboards. Above him, slow, uneven, punctuated by a low, muffled thud. It would scrape, pause, scrape again, until the noise blended so uneasily with the storm that he thought he might be imagining it. Then came the murmurs. They rose from the walls, hushed and guttural, like voices speaking through stone. Not words he could understand, not even a language he recognized, just a chorus of breathy whispers that slithered in and out of earshot. Whenever the thunder cracked, the voices fell silent. But as soon as the sky quieted, they crept back again, seeping through the seams of the inn like smoke. Ethan sat up in bed, his breath caught in his chest. He told himself it was nothing. The storm playing tricks, the wood settling, the mind conjuring phantoms when it was too tired to reason. But the sound of dragging returned, directly above his room this time, as though someone or something was pacing the attic with an unbearable burden. He considered lighting a candle, but the thought of summoning more light made him hesitate. He already felt watched, as though unseen eyes pressed against every corner of the room. Instead, he sat motionless, listening. And then a new sound. A knock. Soft, tentative, from the hallway outside his door. Not like Clara's gentle rapping. Earlier, this one was slower, heavier. 3 dull thuds, spaced apart as though delivered by someone with all the time in the world. Ethan's mouth went dry. He remembered Clara's words. "If you hear me at night, don't come." He waited, heart pounding as the silence stretched. No second knock came. No voice called. Just the distant growl of thunder and the faint hiss of rain against glass. But when he turned his eyes toward the bottom of the door, his breath caught. A shadow lingered there. It was faint in the firelight, but unmistakable, the silhouette of feet planted firmly on the other side of the wood. The figure did not move, did not knock again. It simply stood there, as though waiting for him to open the door. Ethan's hand itched toward the key on the knitstand. He could unlock it, open it just a crack, and see who or what stood beyond. The rational part of him told him it was only Clara again, frightened and seeking comfort. But the way the shadow didn't shift, didn't fidget, didn't breathe, it wasn't like any human presence he had known. Minutes stretched. His throat grew tight, his ears ringing with the strain of silence. And then, just as slowly as it had appeared, the shadow slid away. Not in the way of footsteps retreating, but as though it simply dissolved into the darkness of the hall. Ethan lay back, forcing himself to breathe evenly. He told himself he would not move, that he would wait for morning when light and clarity could banish the dread that clung to the inn. But clarity never came. The whispers returned, louder now, rising and falling in a rhythm that almost resembled chanting. The dragging sound above shifted into something more frantic, scraping faster, circling in uneven loops until it seemed the entire ceiling might give way. Ethan pressed the pillow over his ears, desperate to shut it out, but the sounds bled through inside. His head, not outside. His skin prickled, his stomach twisted, and a single thought bloomed unbidden in his mind. Something in this house doesn't want me here. When exhaustion finally claimed him, it was not restful. He dreamed of burlap sacks, damp and heavy, pressing against his own face, suffocating him while unseen mouths whispered in languages his ears were never meant to hear. And through it all, Clara's voice echoed like a plea, over and over. Please, don't take the sack off. He woke before dawn, heart hammering, the fire dead in the hearth. The room was colder than before, unnaturally cold, as though something had drawn the warmth out of the walls themselves. For the first time in years of wandering, Ethan wished he had kept walking through the storm. Dawn came pale and reluctant, dragging a colorless light through the warped window of Ethan's room. The storm had passed, leaving behind a heavy stillness, the kind that makes the air feel expectant as though the world itself is holding its breath. Ethan sat at the edge of the bed, running a hand over his face. His eyes were heavy from the restless night, his body sore from the sagging mattress, yet his mind was sharp, restless with images of shadows, whispers, and that unmoving figure at his door. He told himself that daylight would strip the night of its horrors, but when he glanced around the small room, the corners still felt too deep, too dark. The air was still cold, though the fire had died hours ago. Cold in a way that seemed unnatural, as though the warmth had been bled away by something unseen. And then there was Clara. He could not stop thinking of her, how she had stood in the doorway, begging him not to remove the sack. The desperation in her voice, the trembling of her hands. It had not been the warning of a girl protecting a family secret. It had been fear. A bone-deep fear that had left its imprint on him, refusing to fade. But alongside that fear, curiosity gnawed at him. What was beneath the sack? The innkeeper's silence, Clara's strange warnings, the way she sat in stillness, always watching though no eyes could be seen. All of it seemed designed to ignite questions without answers. Questions Ethan was finding harder to ignore. Went downstairs, the wooden steps groaning beneath his weight. The common room was dim, the hearth reduced to embers. Clara sat in the same chair as before, her hands folded neatly in her lap, the sack still tied tight over her head. She had not moved since last night, or so it seemed. The innkeeper busied himself behind the counter, grinding something with a mortar and pestle. He did not greet Ethan, nor look up. Ethan hovered near the chair, unsure whether to speak. Clara's head tilted slightly, as though tracking him, though no eyes were visible. The stillness was unbearable, the burlap sack catching the faint glow of morning like some grotesque mask. His throat tightened. He wanted to reach forward, to tug the cord free, to see her face, to know. Sleep well. The innkeeper's voice cut across the silence, sharp and sudden. Ethan jerked, pulling his hand back before he realized he had even reached for her. Restless, he admitted. The old man gave a humorless grunt, still grinding at whatever herbs lay in his bowl. This house does that to folk. Ethan almost asked about the sounds, the whispers, the dragging above his room, but something in the man's tone told him not to. Instead, he sat at one of the tables, his eyes still drawn to Clara. At length, the innkeeper set down the pestle and fixed Ethan with a look. You'll be gone when the road dries. It wasn't phrased as a suggestion. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but a soft voice interrupted. Stay, Clara whispered, her hands twitching slightly in her lap. "Don't go out there yet." The innkeeper's jaw tightened. "Clara." She flinched at the name, shrinking into herself, and said nothing more. The air thickened between them, charged with words unsaid. Ethan felt as though he had stumbled into the web of something ancient and brittle, a family secret woven with rules he could not understand. When the innkeeper returned to his work, Ethan leaned slightly closer to Clara. "Why?" he asked in a low voice. "Why the sack?" Her shoulders stiffened beneath the plain fabric of her dress. For a moment, she didn't respond. Then, barely audible through the burlap, she whispered, "Because if you see, you can't unsee." The words coiled in his stomach like a sickness. He should have left it at that. He should have walked away, taken his pack, and pressed on through the damp roads. But the seed had already been planted, and it grew with every glance he stole toward the faceless figure in the chair. Later, when the innkeeper stepped outside to chop firewood, Ethan lingered near Clara once more. She sat perfectly still, her breathing even, her hands folded. It was so simple, he thought. Just one tug of the cord, one lift of the sack. A single motion and the mystery would be over. Clara's head turned slightly, as though she felt his intention. Her voice trembled through the burlap, low and urgent. "Please, don't." But the longer Ethan stared at the sack, the more he realized he no longer cared about promises. Curiosity was eating him alive. And though his hand hovered just shy of the fabric, every instinct in his body screamed that the moment he touched it, there would be no turning back. The axe thudded outside in slow, steady rhythm, splitting logs in the wet morning air. Ethan lingered in the common room, his tea untouched, watching Clara from across the table. She sat as she always did, straight-backed, hands folded, the sack unmoving except for the faint rise and fall of her breath. Every so often, her head tilted toward him, and though her eyes were hidden, he felt the weight of her gaze. He tried not to let his own curiosity betray him. He told himself he had promised. Yet the promise felt thin now, fragile as glass. When the door creaked open again, the innkeeper stepped back in with an armful of firewood, rainwater still dripping from his coat. He set the logs by the hearth and looked at Ethan with a sharpness that was almost accusatory. "You've been staring," the old man said. Ethan flinched. "I know. I didn't mean to. She told you, didn't she?" The innkeeper's voice was gravel, his expression unreadable. "Told you not to take it off." Ethan swallowed hard. "She did." The innkeeper nodded once, slowly, as though confirming something he had expected. He turned his eyes toward Clara. "And still you're thinking about it." "I can see it in you. They all do." Ethan frowned. "All?" The old man's gaze drifted back to him, heavy and tired. He lowered himself into the chair opposite Ethan, leaning his elbows on the scarred wood. For a long time, he said nothing, just studied Ethan with a weariness that seemed older than the man himself. At last he spoke. "Clara wasn't always like this. She was a child once, bright, laughing, stubborn as the summer sun. But the woods took her." Ethan stiffened. "The woods?" The innkeeper nodded toward the rain-streaked window, where the tree line pressed dark and heavy against the horizon. "There's things in there. Things older than us, older than this town, older than the stone we walk on. Most keep their distance, if you leave them be. But sometimes—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "Sometimes they notice you." Clara shifted in her chair. A faint tremor ran through her hands, but she said nothing. Ethan leaned forward, his pulse quickening. "What happened?" The innkeeper's voice lowered, ragged with memory. "She was 8. Wandered too far. By the time I found her, she was sitting in the hollow of an old oak, still as stone, eyes wide like she'd been staring at something that wasn't there. I carried her home, but she wasn't the same. Not anymore. His hands curled into fists on the table. At first, I thought she was just shaken, but then came the changes. She'd wake in the night screaming, clawing at her own face. Shadows followed her in daylight, bending wrong, moving when she stood still. She'd whisper things, names of people long buried, places she couldn't have known. And the longer I looked at her, the more I saw it. Something looking back through her eyes. Ethan felt his throat tighten. The image of Clara's stillness, her head always tilted toward him, pressed against his thoughts. So the sack? Ethan said slowly. The old man's eyes darkened. It was the only way. I covered her face, tied it tight. And for the first time, she calmed. She stopped clawing, stopped whispering. Whatever stared out of her, it couldn't anymore. Or maybe it just didn't want to. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near growl. But if you untie it, if you so much as glimpse what she hides, it won't just be you looking at her. It'll be it looking at you. And once it sees you, it never forgets. Ethan's skin prickled, a cold sweat running down his back. What is it? He whispered. The innkeeper shook his head. Not something you can name, not something you should. Just know this. I've buried men who couldn't resist. Travelers. Like you, drunkards, peddlers, curious fools. Each one swore they wouldn't touch it. Each one did. And every one of them died screaming. Silence thickened between them. Only the storm drip from the eaves outside and the faint crackle of the hearth broke a dot at last. The innkeeper pushed back from the table. His chair scraped the floor as he stood. If you value your life, boy, keep your promise. Sleep in your room, eat your meals, and be gone when the roads are dry. Leave her as she is. With that, he turned, gathering another log for the fire. Ethan sat frozen, his mind a storm of fear and doubt. He wanted to believe the story, wanted to accept the old man's warning as enough. And yet, the gnawing inside him only grew sharper because if the sack truly held something unspeakable, then seeing it even for a heartbeat would answer every question. Clawing at his mind, and the hunger for answers was stronger than fear. The day dragged on like a weight chained to Ethan's chest. He tried to distract himself, pacing the muddy road outside, helping the innkeeper carry in wood, even mending a loose strap on his pack. But no matter what task his hands found, his mind circled back to the same image. Clara's still figure by the fire, the burlap sack hiding her face, and the possibility, no, the certainty that something was beneath it that should not be. Hidden by evening, the storm clouds had thickened again, bruising the horizon with streaks of gray and violet. The air hung damp and close, carrying the scent of moss and rain-soaked earth. Ethan found himself in the common room once more, staring into the shallow flames of the hearth. Clara sat across from him in her same chair, posture unyielding. The innkeeper had gone to the cellar to fetch more ale. Leaving them alone, it was Clara who spoke first. You're thinking about it? The words, muffled through the sack, hit him like a blow. His head jerked toward her. She had not moved, but her voice was sharp, trembling not with anger, but with something deeper, fear. Ethan swallowed. I promised I wouldn't. Her hands clenched in her lap. And yet you are. I can feel it. Her stillness, her certainty, made his chest tighten. She could feel his thoughts? Or perhaps she simply knew him too well already. Curiosity was a blade, and it was cutting deeper with every hour. Clara leaned forward slightly. For the first time, her composure cracked. You don't understand. If you take it off, it isn't me you'll see. It never is. Her voice broke. It's it. And once it knows your face, there's no hiding, no running. You'll never be free. Ethan forced his voice low. But what if there's a way to help you, to free you from this? Maybe if I saw no. Her cry startled him. raw and sudden, filling the dim room with an intensity that made the flames shudder. Her whole body trembled. "Don't you dare think of saving me. I'm already gone." Her words hung heavy in the silence that followed. For the first time, Ethan saw not just fear in her, but resignation. She had lived like this for years, trapped, suffocating, yet alive only because of the sack. Her voice softened then, breaking like thin glass. The others didn't listen. They wanted to see too, but once you see, you can't close your eyes. It finds ways. In mirrors, in water, in shadows at the corner of your vision. It never stops until you're hollow. Her hands shook now, gripping the fabric of her dress until her knuckles whitened beneath the dim light. "Promise me again," she whispered. "Promise me you'll keep your word, please." Ethan's throat burned. He wanted to mean it, wanted to give her the comfort of his vow. And yet, deep down, he knew it was a lie. His promise was already broken in his heart. Still, he forced himself to say the words, "I promise." Clara sat back slowly, as if his answer had only half satisfied her. She bowed her head, the sack crumpling with emotion, and for the first time he thought he heard a muffled sob beneath the coarse weave. The innkeeper returned then, stomping back from the cellar with a jug of ale. His sharp eyes flicked between Ethan and Clara, reading the tension in the air. "Time for sleep," he said shortly, as though cutting off further words. Ethan stood, his body heavy with the weight of his own deception. He nodded, muttered good night, and made his way up the stairs. But Clara's plea clung to him, pressing into his skull with every step. "Promise me you'll keep your word." Please, Dot, he knew he had given her nothing but a hollow comfort. And yet the hunger in him, the need to see, was stronger than any oath he could make. That night, as he lay in his sagging bed, he stared at the dark rafters above, listening to the storm gather its strength once more. He could hear Clara's breathing in memory, her voice echoing like a warning bell. But it only made the temptation sharper. Dot, and as the wind howled and the whispers in the walls crept back into his ears, Ethan realized the truth. Sooner or later, he was going to break his promise. The storm returned with fury that night. It was not the steady hammer of rain from before, but a chaotic assault wind shrieking down the chimney, shutters slamming, the entire frame of the inn shuddering as though the sky itself wanted to tear it apart. Ethan tossed on his bed, unable to sleep. The whispers had come back stronger, swelling and fading in eerie waves, always just beneath comprehension. He could almost make out words now, as if the voices were brushing against the edges of his mind, pressing syllables into his dreams. His head throbbed with the effort of resisting them, and then he heard it, a muffled scream. He sat bolt upright. Heart-pounding. Dot, it came again, louder. Clara's voice, broken and strangled beneath the sack. Ethan didn't think. He grabbed his candle and stumbled into the hall. The corridor stretched long and crooked, its shadows deep, every board groaning under his hurried steps. The sound drew him downward, toward the common room, until he reached the top of the staircase. What he saw froze him in place. Clara was standing in the middle of the room, rigid, her arms bent unnaturally against her sides, the sack over her. Head writhed as though something inside it was alive. The fabric bulged and pulsed, distending outward as if unseen hands or faces were pressing against it from within. Her muffled scream shook the air, rising to an animal wail that scraped at his bones. "Clara!" Ethan shouted, rushing down the stairs. Her body convulsed, jerking violently, as if strings yanked her limbs at impossible angles. She staggered, hands clawing at the air, and then slammed against the table, sending the jug of ale shattering across the floor. Her head twisted toward him. The sack pulsed again. He saw shapes pressing against it, round, shifting lumps that stretched the coarse fabric until he thought it would tear. A line bulged outward where a mouth should not be, opening in a silent scream before sinking back in. Then an eye-shaped swell appeared, large and unblinking, sliding across the burlap as though something beneath were searching for him. Ethan's stomach lurched. His body screamed to run, but Clara's muffled cries cut deeper than fear. She stumbled toward him, hands shaking violently as if begging him to help. "Nang fu please," the words barely squeezed through the thick weave of the sack. His promise roared in his ears, Clara's warning pounding through him like a heartbeat. "Don't take it off. Don't look." But her trembling body, her strangled pleas, the bulging horrors beneath the sack, it was unbearable. He reached out, his hand brushing against the rough sweat-dampened fabric. It quivered beneath his touch, warm in a way that made his skin crawl. Clara's whole frame stiffened at the contact, her muffled voice spiking into a desperate scream. "Don't, don't," she cried, choking on the words. "Please don't." But Ethan's hand tightened around the cord. His mind whirled with terror and need, the need to end her suffering, the need to see the truth, the need to know. Upstairs, a door slammed. The innkeeper's heavy footsteps pounded down the hall, but Ethan barely heard them. His world had narrowed to the shaking girl before him, the sack twitching and bulging, the secret pulsing beneath it like a living heart. The cord was knotted tight. His fingers fumbled against it, slick with Clara's sweat. Her body jerked violently, her cries turning to guttural howls that made the hair on his neck rise. "Ethan, stop." The innkeeper's voice bellowed from the staircase, but it was too late. Got the knot loosened in his hand. The sack shifted, slipping upward as Clara thrashed. For a heartbeat, he saw only darkness within, a void deeper than the fabric should allow. Then the sack tore. Clara's scream died into a strangled sob, and the thing beneath began to emerge. Ethan froze, his body cold with dread as the innkeeper lunged across the room. The sack hung loose now, half torn, its threads unraveling in Ethan's grip. Clara collapsed to her knees before him, clutching at her head with shaking hands as if she could hold the thing inside her skull down by sheer force of will. Her muffled sobs spilled into the room, raw and animal, broken by words that scraped from her throat like knives. "Please, please, don't. Don't look." Her body convulsed again, the burlap twisting against the movements beneath, as though a dozen faces pressed outward in frantic rhythm, desperate to break through. The sack pulsed like diseased flesh, and each time it swelled, Ethan caught hints of shapes beneath eye sockets too large, too many teeth, ridges where bones shouldn't exist. The innkeeper thundered into the common room, his axe still clutched in his hand from chopping wood. His face was pale, wild with terror. "Drop it," he roared. "Now, boy, or you'll damn yourself." Ethan's hands trembled, but they did not release the fabric. His whole body screamed to obey, to run, to hide, but something stronger pinned him in place. Curiosity, yes, but more than that. The gnawing conviction that if he saw, everything would finally make sense. "What is she?" Ethan's voice cracked, hoarse with desperation. The innkeeper's eyes burned with grief and fury. "She's my daughter. That's all you need to." "No." He surged forward, but Clara's body convulsed again, flinging itself between Ethan and her father. "Don't," she rasped, her head bowing low, the sack nearly slipping free. "If you love me, Father, don't let him." The old man faltered, his axe trembling in his grip. His face collapsed into anguish, torn between rage and helplessness. Ethan's mind raced. He thought of Clara's plea upstairs. "Promise me you'll keep your word." He thought of her trembling hands, her whispered warnings, the fear etched into every syllable. But he also thought of her life, bound forever behind burlap, never to see the world's light again. What kind of existence was that? What if, beneath it all, there was a way to free her? The innkeeper lunged forward, but Ethan yanked back, the sack tearing further. He could see a sliver now, skin stretched too thin, slick and glistening in the firelight, veins pulsing like worms beneath translucent flesh. Something writhed there, pressing outward, eager. His stomach turned. But he could not stop. Clara shrieked, clutching at his wrists, her strength surprising in its desperation. "Don't do this. I'm begging you. Don't let it see you." Her voice, pitiful, broken, human, nearly shattered him. But the glimpse he had caught of what lay beneath had already stolen his will. The thing beneath the sack wasn't just hidden, it was alive. It was waiting. And though every instinct screamed that he should turn away, a darker whisper coiled through his thoughts. "You've come this far. Finish it." See. The innkeeper's roar filled the room. "Ethan, if you look, it'll never leave you alone. It'll know you. It'll follow you until it eats your soul hollow." Ethan's fingers curled into the knot, tugging hard. The fabric gave way in his hands, threads snapping, the sack peeling upward. Clara's sobs twisted into screams of pure despair. "Please," she wailed. "Don't take it." But the words were drowned in a thunderclap as the last of the sack tore free. Ethan held the crumpled fabric in his hands, frozen, breath shuddering in his chest. His eyes lifted slowly against every instinct to Clara's face for a heartbeat. All was still, and then he saw it wasn't a face at all, not anymore. It was a mass of shifting horrors, eyes blinking open in places no eyes belonged, rolling and darting independently. Mouths split and reformed across her skin, gnashing teeth that stretched too wide, some whispering, some shrieking, some laughing with inhuman delight. Her flesh rippled like water disturbed by unseen depths, shapes pressing outward from beneath as though countless beings writhed inside her, trying to crawl free. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. His body turned cold, paralyzed as the truth hit him. It was looking back, not even the monster that had claimed her, but something else, vast and hungry, peering through the dozens of eyes at once. And now it had seen him. The innkeeper fell to his knees, his axe slipping from his hand. "God forgive you," he whispered hoarsely. "It knows you now." Ethan stood frozen, the sack limp in his hands, unable to look away as the mouths across Clara's body curled into a smile that wasn't hers. The sack fell from Ethan's hands and crumpled to the floor, its rough fabric hissing as it landed in the spilled ale. He staggered back, choking on a breath that refused to fill his lungs. His body screamed to flee, but his legs refused to obey. He could not move. He could not even blink, because Clara's face, if it could still be called a face, was looking at him. Her skin rippled like disturbed water, translucent in patches, stretched too thin in others. Beneath, things shifted and pressed outward, shapes too malformed to belong in a human body. Eyes opened across her cheeks, her forehead, her throat, dozens of them, rolling and darting, their pupils slitted, circular, or black and endless voids. Each one fixed on Ethan, unblinking. Her mouth split and reformed, tearing jagged across her jaw, then sliding away to open on her temple, then again at the base of her throat. Teeth gnashed in those mouths, sharp and wet, each one whispering fragments of sound that blended into a cacophony. Some voices laughed. Others hissed words he couldn't understand. A few mimicked Clara's sobbing plea, "Please, please," but the worst part wasn't the mouths. It wasn't the eyes. It was the thing behind them. For a moment, only a sliver of time, Ethan saw through those unnatural eyes, as though they were windows into a place not meant for men. A vast blackness stretched before him, deeper than night, shifting with countless shapes that writhed like serpents in the dark. Massive limbs curled in the void, too large for his mind to measure. Something enormous stirred there, its form obscured, but its attention unmistakable. It had noticed him. Air in the room thickened, pressing against his chest, making each breath shallow and ragged. He couldn't look away. The dozens of eyes on Clara's body widened in unison, their pupils expanding until they swallowed the whites. The many mouths spread into jagged smiles, and a sound rose from them, a low, guttural chuckle that vibrated. The floorboards beneath his feet. The innkeeper dropped to his knees beside her, sobbing openly now, clutching at his chest. "I told you," he rasped, his voice raw. "I told you not to look." "Now it's too late." Ethan couldn't answer. His tongue felt nailed to the roof of his mouth, his mind spiraling into a fog of incomprehension. The thing before him shifted again, and for a heartbeat Clara's own face flickered through a glimpse of her pale skin, her lips trembling, her eyes wide with human sorrow. "Ethan," she whispered through the chaos of other voices, her real voice breaking through for only an instant. "I warned you. Now it will never stop." Her face dissolved again, replaced by the writhing swarm of eyes and mouths. The whispers surged louder, filling every corner of the room, overlapping until Ethan thought his skull would split. His knees buckled, his vision swam. Images poured into his mind, cities crumbling beneath black skies, oceans boiling with shapes that had no names, endless forests of bones stretching farther than the horizon. He saw his own reflection in pools of ink-dark water, his face splitting, multiplying, his eyes opening across his skin. He screamed then, not from pain but from the unbearable weight of knowing. The thing had seen him, and worse, it had shown him a fragment of itself. The innkeeper grabbed his shoulders, shaking him violently. "Don't look. Don't think on it. You'll only make it stronger." But it was already too late. Clara's body convulsed, her limbs jerking at impossible angles, as though the entity inside her was stretching itself further, eager to break free of its prison of skin. The sack, useless now, lay in tatters on the floor. Dozens of eyes blinked in perfect unison, locking onto Ethan. Dozens of mouths twisted upward in one collective grin. And through them, one voice spoke, a voice not Clara's, not the innkeeper's, not human at all. It whispered his name, Ethan. The sound of it hollowed him. It wasn't just in the room. It was inside him, echoing in his skull, his bones, the marrow of his being. The innkeeper wailed and covered his face. Clara's body sagged, weeping and laughing all at once through the mouths that weren't hers, and Ethan stood frozen, every vein filled with ice, knowing with dreadful certainty that he could never leave this thing behind, because it knew him now, and it would never forget. The inn had fallen silent. The storm outside raged on, wind howling through the shutters, rain hammering the roof, but within those walls, all sound was swallowed by the presence in the room. Clara slumped to the floor, her body twitching faintly, the sack torn and useless at her side. The eyes across her skin blinked lazily now, as though drowsy after a feast, and the many mouths murmured disjointed whispers like embers fading to ash. Ethan's knees finally gave out. He collapsed onto the floorboards, his palms pressed flat against the sticky ale and splinters. His body trembled violently, his breath refusing to steady. His eyes burned, but he couldn't close them, not while those things kept watching him. Innkeeper knelt beside his daughter, his shoulders shaking with sobs. He tried, in a futile desperation, to drape the tattered sack back over her head, but the fabric fell away uselessly, as if the thing inside her had decided it no longer needed. Hiding. She was my little girl? The man wept, his voice ragged, broken. I thought the sack could bind it. I thought if she was never seen, if it never looked upon another, it might stay quiet. But you, his gaze snapped toward Ethan, filled with grief and fury. You've damned us both. Ethan tried to speak, to explain, to apologize, but his tongue refused to form words. His voice cracked only into a rasping cough. Clara stirred, lifting her head. For a heartbeat, just when her true face surfaced again. Her real eyes, wide and full of unbearable sorrow, looked directly into his. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she whispered, her voice faint but clear. "I told you not to." And now, her lips trembled, and then her face rippled away again, dissolving into a writhing mask of eyes and mouths. The voices laughed softly. One of the mouths formed her apology. Again, but warped, mocking. "I told you not to." The innkeeper roared, lifting his axe in trembling hands. He swung it down with all his strength, burying the blade into the floorboards inches from Clara's body. His shoulders slumped and the weapon clattered from his grip. He could not do it. He could not enter. The thing laughed louder. Ethan staggered to his feet, stumbling backward until he hit the wall. His eyes darted to the window. For a moment, he thought to flee, to hurl himself into the storm and never look back. But deep inside, he knew the truth. Running would change nothing. The eyes had seen him. The whisper had spoken his name. Whether near or far, it would always find him now. Clara's body sagged, shuddering with exhaustion. The voices quieted, fading into low murmurs. Her eyes, too many to count, slowly closed until only her real ones remained open, looking at him with fragile humanity. "Please," she said weakly, "if you still care, don't let anyone else see me. Not ever." Again, her father wept harder, clutching her hand. Ethan could not move. He could only nod, though the weight of the promise crushed him like stone. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost its shape. Eventually, the storm waned, the thunder rolling into the distance. The inn lay in ruins of silence, broken only by the creak of wood and the ragged breathing of those inside. At some point, Ethan stumbled back to his room. His body moved without thought, his mind hollow. He shut the door, bolted it, and collapsed against the bed. But sleep did not come. The whispers followed. When he dared to glance into the cracked mirror on the wall, his heart froze. For just an instant, in the dim glow of the dying fire, he saw his own reflection smile back at him, only it wasn't his smile. His lips stayed still, yet the reflection curved upward in a grin far too wide, teeth glinting in the dark. And above his brow, an eye slowly blinked open. He staggered back, crashing into the wall, but when he looked again, the reflection was only his pale, trembling, eyes hollow with dread. But he knew it had already begun. The sack had hidden Clara's curse, but no sack would ever hide his. And somewhere deep in his mind were the whispers now coiled like snakes. A voice that was not his own whispered again, gentle, patient, eternal. "Ethan." He sank to his knees, trembling, and understood. The truth with a clarity colder than death. What he had seen could not be unseen. What had seen him would never let go.